we got here because of the careful tending of our forefathers. Despite the difficulties and the challenges which they faced, they still put savings aside so that we can enjoy this resource today. And we are that much better off for it and grateful to them for it. Now, we too should fulfill our obligation to our children and grandchildren to protect their interest in this nest egg. This nest egg, it's the money of the people of Singapore, yes, but it is not the money only of this generation of the people of Singapore. It belongs to this generation, it belongs to future generations too, and we have a responsibility to both. And if we fulfill that responsibility, in time, our children and grandchildren too can benefit from a steady stream of returns from the reserves and also have an umbrella to protect them come a rainy day. We must not erode the patrimony, this family treasure, which we have inherited from our forefathers, nor should we burden future generations with debt, nor mortgage their future. We are beneficiaries of our forefathers' sacrifice and vision, but we are also trustees protecting this inheritance for future generations. It is not just for us, and we have a responsibility to our children and grandchildren. This is the ethos and the compact which generations of Singaporeans have forged, and it is one that, in fact, has been upheld across the aisle in this House. During the global financial crisis, I spoke about it briefly just now, we brought forward the FY 2009 budget to deal with the crisis, and we had a crisis budget. In the budget, this is a budget where we had the job support scheme, and we were going to draw $4.9 billion from the past reserves. And in the budget debate, Mr. Low Thia Khiang questioned why the government wanted to draw down on past reserves instead of using savings from the government's current budget. And he said, past reserves, no, let's read it again. He said, what is unusual of our resilience package is that the government will be using our past reserves to fund two main components of the package, the jobs credit scheme and the special risk sharing initiative. I think I misspoke, I said job support scheme, it's a jobs credit scheme. Past reserves are a strategic asset meant for use in times of need, especially when the government faces financial constraints due to unprecedented circumstances which require the government to respond in the interest of the nation. Hence, I am surprised that the government has chosen to set a precedent in asking the President for approval for a drawdown of our past reserves when it has enough savings from the current term of government to fund the entire resilience package and the resulting budget deficit, which the Finance Minister has estimated at a certain amount. So it was a very reasonable question. Actually, it's a very polite objection, and it was right that he raised it, and we debated it. And our answer was, we are doing this so that we have dry powder. And there are current reserves. We may well need it later. We put that aside. If we need to, we will use it. As it turned out, fortunately, we didn't need to. 2 years later, in 2011, when the government paid the $4 billion back to the past reserves, Mr. Low spoke again. He did the honorable thing and commended the government. And he said, in the budget debate again, 2011, in conclusion, sir, the budget this year has done one thing right. It has prudently put back into past reserves the $4 billion that the government took in 2009. So this is how a responsible opposition conducts itself. There was a common commitment to safeguard our past reserves and a recognition, shared recognition, that they are a strategic asset only to be used for unprecedented circumstances. Now, I hear the opposition arguing that we should change the rules and draw more from reserves, and that, of course, they have no intention to raid the reserves, far from wanting to bankrupt Singapore. They say we can easily afford what they are proposing. I conclude their tune has changed. May I remind them that the changes they are proposing are not simply policy changes, but require amending the Constitution to draw and to spend more from past reserves, which are protected by the President. Some people say it's harder for this generation to abide by the same tight fiscal rules as before. They say that now growth is slower, the cost of living has gone up, which is true. But our forefathers, who put aside the surpluses which grew into the reserves, were much less well off than us. To put it bluntly, much poorer than us. Our standard of living is double or triple what our forefathers lived with. And yet they saved up surpluses for the future, whereas now we hear arguments that we should draw more from the reserves on the basis that we need the money more urgently today. There's a Chinese saying, 创业难, 守业更难, 败家轻而易举. Hard to start, even harder to keep it going, but all too easy to ruin and to lose everything. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and his team had anticipated this outcome, this political pressure. They knew that there would always be many worthy, heart-tugging causes demanding government resources. Every MP has got pet causes which he champions. Even ministers have pet causes. Even prime ministers are allowed to have a few. We all want more things to be done. But we also know, and Mr. Lee knew, that money would always be not enough. And he knew that it would always be politically tough to raise taxes, and that's why he and his colleagues designed and implemented the two-key scheme. Some of Mr. Lee's senior colleagues told him that in locking up the reserves, he was trying the impossible. Trying the impossible. You know why? Because their philosophy was, if a generation wants to spend the money, somehow they'll get their hands on it and they will do it. But Mr. Lee disagreed and decided he had to try his best. And it's up to us and for us now to prove that we can protect the nest egg and that Singaporeans are capable of being prudent and responsible well beyond the founding generation. We are not Asyakya. We are responsible. We are also forefathers, one day, of generations yet to be born.